Welcome to Potter Revisited, episode 69. I'm Tori.
And I'm Shay.
Today we are covering chapter 9 of Goblet of Fire, The Dark Mark.
Or, as we like to call it, Safety Now. Clarification later.
Yeah, it's a dark chapter.
It's heavier than I remembered. I think a lot of the times when I haven't reread the book in a while, because of the internet and memes, I have memories of memes and GIFs of the movie events. So in my mind, it's quicker. This scene, it's just sort of oh, it's not the Irish, and then you find, you know what I mean? It's so much faster in the movie.
Yeah.
You miss out on a lot of what's so terrifying.
We open the chapter with them leaving the Quidditch game, and obviously there's big highs because after a sporting event, usually there's just a lot of celebration.
The euphoria, the overall feeling of been going through an emotional journey with a bunch of people, the highs, the lows, having won, it's a win. They're basking in reflective glory.
Fred and George have obviously won their bet with Ludo, so they have big plans for their winnings.
Yes, and Mr. Weasley, who's a very, very smart man, is not asking the twins what their plans are with that money, because that way, when Molly finds out, he can honestly say he did not know they were planning to do that. He is a few steps ahead. He knows how this goes.
He wants plausible deniability.
Yeah, seriously. He is a very, very smart man.
Harry has this kind of dream where he's thinking about the Quidditch game, and he's just really obsessed with all the Quidditch moves that Draco was doing, and he kind of dreams himself as a professional Quidditch player, with Ludo Bagman calling out his name. And I feel this is the first time Harry kind of considers his future after school.
Yeah.
A future career. And it's being a professional Quidditch player.
The funniest thing is that the only professional Quidditch robes that will have the name Potter on them will be Ginny's.
True. Yeah, it's just nice to think about, because also in this book we have Harry's introduction to Aurors, and we know that that's what he becomes. But it's nice to have him consider other options.
I feel every kid when they're younger has a couple jobs that are your I'm growing up, I don't fully understand the world dream jobs. I know pretty early on I wanted to be a forensic scientist, and not I'm in high school and I'm dig science way, but I'm in primary school and I caught the tooth fairy by dusting for fingerprints and collecting all my family's fingerprints using cheap eyeshadow and scotch tape and that kind of vibe. I loved that. And I really was I'm going to be a forensic scientist. I'm so bad at math that I could not be good at the sciences you need to be good at. But that was definitely my earliest memory of a real job that exists, as opposed to I wanted to be Buffy the Vampire Slayer for a while, but can't hold that against me.
I wanted to be a vet because I liked animals, and then I feel I got turned off when I realized that you probably had to help animals be put to sleep, and I was fuck that.
Yeah. But I think this is very healthy and natural for Harry to be a lot of young people grow up and they're I'm going to be a NHL star hockey player. And that's basically what Harry's dreaming of. It's very believable before you decide you want to be an accountant instead, because that's more feasible.
We grew up, but it's just nice to see he's considering things that are about his future of the chosen one.
It's not all about Voldemort. It's not all about being the chosen one.
I like playing Quidditch. I'll be a professional Quidditch player. And it's just not about, because I have things about Harry becoming an Auror in the future that I'm not sure if that's what I would have seen him as, but we can talk about that later.
But it is fun to see him fantasizing about his future and his life as an adult, especially having seen so many wizards and witches of different ages and backgrounds for the first time, just in the earlier chapter of this book. Okay, those are wizards in France, so there are jobs for wizards in France, and those are wizards from Ireland. And it's interesting to see Harry finally starting to psychologically think about the wizarding world outside of Hogwarts and after Hogwarts.
Yeah, and his future.
So they're all happy. Everything's great. They talk some Quidditch and they go to bed in their tents. And then Harry sort of starts to wake up in the night. And he starts to hear screaming from outside and there's shouts. And I was at a wedding once where afterwards people slept in tents. And I was a child. And people, drunker people got in fights later at night. And so I'm in my tent sleeping and I'm waking up and you're seeing the silhouettes of people sort of outside the tent, and you're hearing shouting and anger and clearly hostile, aggressive tones. And so that's such a palpable experience for me to have had that experience and been kind of confused and scared as a child, to hear that happening to Harry and to be able to relate to him so much in that particular moment. There's something about being in a tent when something you don't know about fully, that's vague, but you know is bad is happening outside. It's just like when you're in a tent, you can hear everything, but you can't see everything. You've got just like these silhouettes. And so you feel very vulnerable and scary, but at the same time, you're right in the middle of it. So like it's a very anxiety inducing sort of moment to be like, you're in a tent, bad things are happening out there, but you can't really see it.
Yeah, being in a tent can be pretty vulnerable experience because you feel kind of exposed in a way.
Yeah, yeah, very much so. And like not being able to see out enough to know if it's a safe time to leave the tent to run to safety.
Yeah.
Also, tents are really hot. It gets really hot inside a tent. So I'm like, you're kind of sweaty on top of that. So it's just like a really rough start to this happening. Like it's bad, there's danger, you don't know what, you need to take action. It's
The imagery of Mr. Roberts and his family being assaulted in this way, and I use the word assaulted like very literally, it hits different as an adult because I feel like when I read this as a kid, I don't think I really comprehended like the trauma and the assault of it.
yeah, the actual risks when you're a real adult looking back on this and knowing that situations like that happen all the time, you understand what the actual consequences and the actual long-term repercussions of being on the side of that family being abused is. And when you're younger, you don't realize that those consequences exist in that situation. You don't realize how bad the outcome can be. You could be like, okay, they're just messing around with them. It's not very nice. They'll be okay though.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I had issue with was the fact that they were in the air because I have a fear of heights, and as a kid, I was just like, oh, it'd be so scary and terrifying.
I think it was for me with the moment when they say like a Miss Roberts' dress goes up a bit and she's wearing big voluminous bloomers because it's a kid's book. So they're like, oh no, it's not inappropriate. They're goofy underwear. It's embarrassing, but it's not. But to me, like that's so gross and violating and intrusive and embarrassing, and there's people hooting and hollering, and you just know like in the real world a group of people that riled up who hate that family that much would do horrible horrible things to that woman. And like I can't as an adult knowing how situations like that unfold in the real world like bring my brain back to like children's book. The repercussions are going to be not that bad. It's a children's book. They'll be fine. There are no like it's gonna, but like
They're still sheltering us a bit, but yeah, you definitely can read it in between the lines as like, especially as adult women, being like, ooh, just kind of makes your skin crawl a bit.
yeah. Oh man, it's very scary. It's very real. It's very much believable thing to happen in the world. A group of people hate another group of people and they publicly mistreat them for their own entertainment. I get into it later, but it's not just about scaring people and being like, look, we're Death Eaters. It's about dehumanizing muggles and being like, muggles aren't people, so we don't have to treat them like people. We can do what we want to them. No one can stop us. It takes the power away from them. It takes the humanity away from them. It's really, really horrendous. And like, they would need so much therapy after that. Like, I kind of hope the auras effectively remove their memories because I don't want them to remember that. But I also want to make sure they don't like subconsciously start to remember it and have to live with the trauma without having like the validation that like you're going through this because something horrible happened to you. And of course you're feeling like this because this happened. Like it's so hard to think that they might have those subconscious symptoms of the trauma without the realization that the legitimized traumatic event occurred.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like that's so terrifying.
Yeah, so Mr. Weasley obviously tells the kids to go into the forest and be safe, and him and the older Weasley kids are going to go help the Muggles.
Hermione pulls out her wand and does a quick Lumos to guide the way through the darkness because magic outside of Hogwarts is fine. So it does sort of tell us something about how the magical trace works, though. So in my mind, it's sort of tracking locations where they know wizards are, live, or will be. And they can tell what spells were done there or if a lot of magic is occurring there, but they can't necessarily identify who did what unless they were to take everyone's wands and test them. So in situations like this, because Hermione is surrounded by a bunch of magical people who are allowed to be doing magic, they don't really notice. Like there's so much data being presented, they can't notice the one data point that would be that wizard there doing illegal underage magic.
Yeah, I also think that Hermione knows that like this is kind of like a special situation, and in special situations you're allowed to use magic if it's like dire consequences, and she knows that this is obviously, she's a rule follower, so she's like they won't punish me because like this is obviously a special circumstances.
Exactly.
The circumstances are that Ron tripped over a tree root and fell over.
Listen, Ron's in danger. Hermione's gonna get to the bottom of it.
But they run into Draco, and Ron obviously trips over the tree root, and then Draco makes this comment about Ron's like feet size, and I'm just like,
What's the comment? I don't remember it.
Draco says, well, with feet that size, hard not to.
Oh, feet and hard.
Why is Draco so concerned with Ron's feet size?
Yeah, Draco.
But Malfoy basically admits that his parents are Death Eaters because they're like, where are your parents, Draco? And he's like, well, if they were out there, I wouldn't tell you, but you just kind of did.
It's not like he's almost revealing it because he's proud.
Yeah.
He's so proud, and not even in like a political sense, like, oh, my parents are Death Eaters and that's cool. It's like he's enjoying how much fear they're causing, like how much of a scene they're putting on, like the theatrics of it. He's like, this is so much, this is such a big deal, and it's all my parents, you know? Like it's not even like he doesn't even comprehend the reality of the situation. He just thinks, wow, look how afraid Potter is of my parents, and I want Potter to know it's my parents, so he feels like an idiot. You know what I mean? Like it's such a snarky, grimy.
He also kind of alludes that Hermione's in danger, so Harry and Ron are kind of like, okay, let's get out of here. They run into a group of like students that are like around their age, but they're French, and they're looking for Madame Maxime, but it kind of threw me off because like, why would they be with their headmistress over the summer holidays at a Quidditch match?
Well, I think that the whole school was traveling abroad to attend the Triwizard Tournament, and I don't think the parents brought the kids to the Quidditch World Cup. I think the kids that were approved to go to the Quidditch World Cup, like it's a school trip, and the Quidditch World Cup is part 1 of the school trip, and part 2 of the school trip is the Triwizard Tournament.
This would be August. Would they be in session at this point? Because
I don't think they're in session because they're starting their session like at Hogwarts. They're going to do school there. So I just think like the trip starts a little bit like travel time and everything before you actually start the school year. And it includes the Quidditch World Cup because that's such a big event. So it's like it's not during the school year, but the teacher's still running the trip and it's still probably organized by the school.
the Triwizard Tournament doesn't start till like October though, because I don't think they come to Hogwarts until like October.
Maybe I'm an idiot.
I don't know. I just thought that was weird. I get it was probably trying to set up the idea that like, oh, they're from Beauxbatons, like the other school that's gonna come up, hint hint. But it just felt weird that they were like where's Madame Maxine? And I'm like, where are your parents?
Yeah, seriously. Maybe Madame Maxine is taller, so they think they're more likely to identify her in a crowd. They're like, have you seen the tallest French woman you could possibly imagine?
Harry also realizes around this time that he has lost his wand, and it definitely feels like he feels very vulnerable and exposed without it. And it reminds me, like in this day and age, like losing your phone. Because I remember moving to the city, my phone had died once. And I didn't have a charger, and I just felt so unbelievably exposed because I was in the city. I wasn't super comfortable with the transit yet, and like where I was, and I used my phone a lot to like just call people, let them know where I am, and also just to like GPS, like go places, and just like not having anywhere I couldn't call anyone or not know where I was. It was very vulnerable experience.
Yeah. And Hermione is also feeling incredibly vulnerable despite having her wand because Draco made it pretty clear that the type of group that's out there harassing people would see her as a muggle, despite the fact that she's magic, because they're racists. And so they've made it pretty clear that like Hermione would be a target if they saw her. So Hermione is justifiably pretty stressed and wants to get the boys the heck out of there. And Ron's stopping and talking to Veelas, and Harry's stopping to get clarification on whether by you-know-who she means Voldemort. Like, run, boys. She's in danger. The risk is greater for her. Prioritize the safety now and get the clarification later. There's such an urgency that I'm not feeling from Harry and Ron that I am feeling from Hermione.
Yeah. Hermione takes things a lot more seriously than they do.
And I need them to get on board and like sort their shit out or procrastinate sorting their shit out and just follow Hermione, get somewhere safe.
Yeah, so interesting. We bring up the Veela. They run into the Veelas, but only Ron is the one that's kind of affected by it. He says that he, developed a broom that can go to Jupiter or whatever. But Harry helps Hermione pull him away. So I'm just wondering, because we do see in the series that Ron is definitely more affected by Veelas than Harry is.
Yeah, I do see that. I think maybe part of it is Harry prefers gingers and they're all blondes. I don't know.
Harry has very direct crushes.
Yeah, I don't know. Or like he's just so distracted, maybe.
Harry has a lot going on too. He doesn't have time for, like hormones and, just like women. He's like,
Yeah, he's busy.
maybe I'll look into some theories a bit more, but it's just something that comes up a lot in this series, but like how affected Ron gets and Harry just isn't in comparison.
Also, maybe it has to do with like ability to fight off magical psychological like warfare, because like they're using your brain against you in some way, and maybe it has to do a little bit with his like practicing to fight his worst fears, Dementor Bogart situation or something. Like he has more mental strength at this point because he's had to fight through mental persuasion, even Voldemort and his brain having a connection.
I just had a thought. What if it's the Horcrux that doesn't allow Harry to be affected? So they see Winky running around in the forest, and Harry says that she probably is running weird because she didn't ask permission. So she's like fighting against this magic bond or whatever. And this is when Hermione kind of gets her SPEW thoughts going, being house elves get a very raw deal.
Because they do, and she's absolutely right.
And it's very interesting, like, comparison where she's very much saying like this is slavery, and it is, and Ron's just like, oh, like they want to be, this is how they want to be, like this, they want to be enslaved and they're happy that way. And it's a very like familiar opinions of people that like have said about real life slavery, being like, oh, they wanted to be that way, they were happy.
Yeah, it's just bullshit. It is absolute, complete and total bullshit. It's like they've sort of ingrained it and like Stockholm syndromed the house elves into thinking that the best life they can have is working for their quote unquote wizard masters, and like this is what makes you happy. No, this is what makes all house elves happy. So they've like manipulated them socially into thinking that that's the norm and what they should want, when that's not a norm and it's not something anyone should want. So it really is really sad to see Winky and how ingrained in her that really is.
Yeah.
And because it absolutely, they don't want that. Nobody wants to spend their time getting nothing and in return having to do a bunch of crap they don't want to do. It's insane. And the fact that they don't even have the rights to like break their master's orders if their own personal life is in danger. Like if your owner says, hey, wait in line for me, I'm going to go grab something else from the store, and you're waiting in line and the place burns down and they said wait in line, do you just stand there and die? Like, I don't understand.
But they also see Bagman just kind of like appears feeling like very stressed, but he doesn't even know about the riot or anything going on. They just tell him.
He's so unaware.
So bad at his job. I feel like if this was like real life, he would have been fired after this event.
I mean, but he's so good at Quidditch.
He's the head of his department, and like this happens.
They didn't expect him to be good at anything anyway, but he would be a good scapegoat.
Yeah, well, exactly.
They could convince people like, listen, you all kind of knew he was an idiot but wanted to hang out with the Quidditch guy, so no one's surprised that he caused a bunch of terrorists to show up, right? You know, it was all him. Like, he would have made a convenient scapegoat.
So the big part of this chapter is that when the trio are kind of just, waiting for things to die down, they hear a spell and the Dark Mark appears, and obviously they are then like surrounded by ministry wizards who, assume that a bunch of 14-year-olds could just, conjure the Dark Mark.
Yeah, it's pretty dumb.
And we kind of see this dark side of, like, Mr. Crouch. Like, he's just very crazed.
Angry and immediately looking for someone to blame.
Yeah.
Which is very political. It's very much a politician move. Okay, who are we going to blame so it's not us, the politicians, being blamed? I think it's so funny, though, because they're asking them what they saw. Like, what happened? What did you see? And Hermione's like, I heard someone, they were over there, and they said words or an incantation, which is like a vague description of like, you were there, so you can point out where they were, and they said something. She has no idea what they said. And Crouch is immediately like, you sure do know a lot about conjuring the Dark Mark, Missy. And it's like, what? Her description was so vague. It lacks any detail. It was literally exactly what a person would say. Like, I heard something over there. They said something. Don't know what. And like, also, every spell ever involves being at a place and saying a thing. Like, that's what a spell is. So
just also how stressed the adults are, because this is obviously like they don't understand like the ramifications of the Dark Mark being seen for the first time in however many years. But like the adults are kind of having like flashbacks and like they're just very stressed, and you can kind of see it with Amos, Diggory, and Crouch especially, just how like they're just very quick to jump to conclusions, and Mr. Weasley and a few other wizards are like, wait a minute, like they're kids, like obviously that's not them.
It's like, first of all, Harry Potter, last person to ever be suspicious of conjuring the dark mark. There's just no reason for it. Because like even if you were really clever and he was doing it to collect Death Eaters close together so he could set a trap for them as vengeance for his parents' death, he's 14 and isn't that smart and does not know how to do those things.
This is the part where you would say that he knows 2 spells.
Yeah, he knows fucking 2 spells. So it's definitely not like, imagine Harry's 2 spells and none of them are conjuring a very unique and rare and specific spell only known by Death Eaters that does a big snake head in the sky.
He doesn't even know what the dark mark is.
It shows that the symbol was taken for how it was meant by the people who carried it. And so, like, it was immediately associated with badness and hatred and evil. And, like, it seems like it wasn't around often. Like, I know how after World War II, German people take seeing the swastika very seriously because they understand, the consequences of it. And so, like, if a person tries to hang a swastika up in Germany, like there are repercussions that gets taken. You get like, it's not just like, oh, well, they can have their beliefs. It's like, no, that's not allowed. We know exactly what terrible things happened under that flag, and Germany does not stand for it. And it's good because it seems like that's what happened with the dark mark. They didn't allow those symbols to continue.
Which is why it was so off-putting to see it for like the first time in so many years because of what it represented.
It's nice to know that the Ministry did a good job of like squishing the symbolism that was pro-Voldemort after he fell. It's almost the opposite of like the Confederate flag, which people continue to keep on their lawns in the South, despite the fact that it literally just represents being racist.
I did find it interesting how Mr. Crouch is trying to like align himself with Harry, being like to put off like, because he's done things obviously that are illegal. And he's just like, I am the least likely person to, do this after Harry Potter because I am a good person who never do bad things.
And he also is low-key hinting at what we'll find out later, which is he is so against Voldemort and the Death Eaters that he sent his own child to prison for being involved with that. And like, he's like reminding them of that without saying it flatly out.
But obviously, Winky is found with Harry's wand, which has done the dark mark. And the interrogation by Amos and Mr. Crouch is very hard to read. I felt very disturbed reading it.
Yeah. It was really hostile, really illogical. Amos has kind of lost his shit.
I say dehumanizing, but it's like, I know she's not human, but the fact that it's like she's still like a creature with feelings, as Hermione says.
It's like the opposite of personification. It's depersonification. Because, like, I mean, to my mind, honestly, Winky and house elves, like, they're all human. They have the traits to me of humanity. Basically, creatures of equal to humans' intelligence. You know what I mean? And so, like, that's human to me as far as I'm concerned. I think a mermaid, if they existed, would be as human as me, humanity-wise. So it's really horrible the way they talk about Winky. And it's also horrible that we learn that, like, other magical creatures aren't allowed wands. There's, like, laws upheld by wizards who all have wands that other magical creatures can't have wands.
We kind of see in the series about, like, wizards always assume like there's like a betterment because they can do magic, and so because like I guess they've been forced into hiding by muggles, they have like this superiority over magical creatures, being like, well, you can do magic without a wand, so you don't get one, because they still want to have like the control,
the advantage. They want to have the advantage, and it definitely puts the wizards having all the wands in in a position to continue to mistreat the other animals because they can't the other characters. Because if they don't have wands, they can't defend themselves as effectively. And there's things they're going to rely on wizards for because the wizards can use the wand to do the magic that provides those things. So, like, it's really clearly, like, rude, hostile political decisions that, like, are put in place because there are some wizards that should not be allowed wands. And there are some house elves and centaurs that probably do deserve to have wands.
Yeah, it's just so sad seeing Winky just like so like devastated, and even like the words they use, like servant and master, and it's just like, oh, it makes my skin crawl.
It's gross. And Hermione's like, this is grimy and gross, and I'm like, I feel like this is when I start to really get on board with Hermione. Like, there's a couple times earlier on in the series I'm like, oh, Hermione, don't do that. You caused that problem yourself. Explain things better.
Or you know what, Hermione just gives you like secondhand embarrassment, but here's it's just like, yeah, Hermione, I'm with you.
Yeah, exactly. But here I'm like, yeah, absolutely. You tell him, girl. You tell those government officials.
I feel like first reading it when I was a kid, when Hermione gets really into SPEW, it was really hard for me to relate to her because I just see it through Harry and Ron's perspective of just being like, oh, my friend's so embarrassing because she's so like pushy about this. But growing up, you're like, Hermione was like the only one doing anything. And obviously she's very pushy and probably went about things the wrong way. But like in general, she was trying to do a good thing.
I think the boys get distracted because there's always going to be a big adventure and a lot they have to do every year, and they kind of it's expected at this point, some unexpected magical adventure. But like Hermione really takes the time to like actually try and make changes beyond just like, yes, we're probably going to fight Voldemort this year in some way or form. And that's going to be, yes, a public service that helps everybody, but also we can do little things along the way. And the boys are like, no, no, we'll help the world when Voldemort tries to kill us near the end of the school year. We don't really do things before, we don't really do things before November. I definitely can relate to her also as like, I went through a PETA phase as a vegetarian when I was in high school. Like you become a vegetarian, you read too much content from PETA, and I wasn't obnoxious, but I did have stickers and stuff like with sad looking elephants on them, and like so I understand what it's like to be like super suddenly passionate about like the rights of a creature you think can't speak up for itself.
Well, I'm definitely a person that has like hyper fixations, so I can definitely like I'd probably not like political kind of activism stuff, but there's definitely things I was very passionate about. Harry Potter probably being one, where it's just like that was like the only thing that mattered at a certain point in time.
I'm like that too. I'm 100% that person as well. Like I hyperfixated on the animal rights and not like on everybody needs to be vegetarian, but I was a big fan of like everybody should be conscious of the impact the meat they eat has on the environment and like how they can slightly reduce how much meat they eat just to do a little bit better for the environment. Like I went through that phase where I was that person. And I went through the whole I won't use any products that are tested on animals and like whole thing. You know what I mean? Like I hyperfixate on that for a while. So I understand totally where Hermione's coming from, especially when it's a creature that like can't necessarily speak up for themselves.
Especially like the way she was introduced to it. Like she's obviously seeing like because Hermione is the one that comes from like a normal Muggle family, and so she knows all about like slavery and stuff like this from like that side of the Muggle world. And she's coming in and seeing these things where she always assumed like the Wizarding world would be better, and she's seeing these things that like in her other life like that's not a thing. And because Ron and everyone else has grown up with this just being what it is, it's like to her it's just so like right in her face, and I think it could be a bit of like whiplash being like this is obviously slavery, and like how do you not see it?
I mean, it's so blatant.
Yeah,
I think if it's something you're used to in your culture, they're like, no, 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 our parents call it house elves, not unpaid manual labor. You know what I mean? So it's like culturally they've been told it's fine, so they think it's fine. And she's never seen it before. And the closest thing the relationship between a house elf and their master has to anything is the slave relationship. So she's like, well, that's this. It exists in the real world and it's not cool there either. Like, so she sees it as something horrible and they kind of just like pass it off as like, man, it's just a wizard thing. You'll figure it out when you spend more time in the wizarding world. And she's like, no, I don't want to. I don't want to be okay with it.
yeah, but Mr. Weasley takes them back to the tent after the debacle of Winky, and the Dark Mark has been semi-solved, at least not really great for Winky, but
somebody with a deep voice who wasn't a house elf definitely cast a spell.
they did have this interesting part where it said that only Death Eaters knew how to do it, and they were trying to consider if it was a friend or a foe. And they did say like if the person had done it to protect someone, they would have had to be Death Eater in the past. Kind of bring up the idea that like there could be like a two-timing Death Eater, which kind of made me think of Snape, and kind of bring up the idea that like someone could have been a Death Eater but like change sides.
Absolutely. I think Hermione is the one who comes in with the next level thinking. Once Arthur explains the Dark Mark and only Death Eaters can do it, and then he explains that the Death Eaters ran because they saw it and some of them weren't loyal to Voldemort when he disappeared, so Voldemort's back, they would run like hell if they saw his mark in the sky. Hermione immediately is like next level thinking like, okay, those are the options. So either the purpose of casting the Dark Mark is to support the beliefs of Voldemort, or the purpose of casting the Dark Mark is to scare away the Death Eaters. And I'm like, that's an interesting way to look at it. You could really go down that thought line if you didn't know how the series continues and what ends up being discovered. Like, oh, interesting. A good guy who somehow learned how to conjure the Dark Mark, or who used to be a Death Eater, conjures the mark because he doesn't want those muggles to be tortured anymore. So he's like, I'm going to conjure the dark mark. It's going to scare all the other wizards, but they're not the priority right now. It's that muggle family. And all the bad guys are going to scatter. And then the wizards can clean up the mess. You know what I mean? So, like, that's not something I would have considered before, but Hermione really was thinking next level and, like, really contemplating all of the potential motivations. I love that for her. 14-year-old Hermione is on another level.
Part of the thing I thought interesting was that Hermione and Percy had this conflict about house elves, which is really interesting because it does say that Hermione and Percy usually get along really well because they usually have very aligned values. They're both very ambitious, they both follow the rules. And this is just the one thing that kind of like, or Percy's just like, he's grown up with this and he's just like, oh, that's just like what it is. Mr. Crouch deserves to have like a servant that like follows his command. And Hermione's like, well, that whole concept is bullshit.
Isn't that you, Percy? I thought you were the servant who followed his commands. Like, is that not your job? I'm confused. It's weird. Especially for Percy, I think it's a little bit being a wizard from a wizarding family.
Well, yeah, he grew up this way.
Yeah, but it's also a little bit still his hero worship of Mr. Crouch. He's like, if something were ethically wrong, Mr. Crouch, who I admire deeply, would not do it. So it must be ethically justified.
Well, Percy's a rule follower, and he's like, it's not against the rules. And Mr. Crouch is like the commander of the rules. Like he respects the rules. And Hermione, like, obviously respects rules, but she's just like, she's more, I think, more of like a moral person where she's just like, this is wrong.
Yeah, Percy's thinking of it as like having someone who does things for you is something that Mr. Crouch deserves. And Hermione's thinking of it as having someone who bosses you around, mistreats you, and forces you into situations you aren't comfortable is not something that Winky deserves. And I think that's where they differ.
Percy at this point has very black and white thinking where Hermione can see more shades of gray. And we do see how that kind of affects Percy moving forward, where he's just like, there's like good and bad, right and wrong, and with his family, and that kind of pulls him away from it until he's able to kind of see like the full picture. Yeah, but this chapter kind of ends on a bit of like, you know, kind of sad, dark.
It's sad and dark. Like they're basically saying, okay, we're going to have to wipe the memories of those muggles, which again just reminds us that those muggles have been deeply, deeply hurt and embarrassed and traumatized. And on top of it, they don't know magic exists. So the flying part alone, like the flying part doesn't hit me that strongly because I'm not terribly afraid of heights. It's the fact that they're being flown around by humans who are just doing it with their magic and they didn't even know magic exists. So like the only way you know magic exists right now in the world is these people torturing you with it. Like to imagine that there is magic in the world and then immediately be told, but it's being used to hurt you. And as far as you know, that's the only thing it's ever been used for. Like it's really sad. And I really hope they wipe their minds well and then follow up afterwards to make sure that they're not having any symptoms of starting to remember or trauma.
Well, knowing how the ministry is, I very much doubt that, unfortunately. Harry also has this very contemplative moment where he's just kind of thinking, because he's been kind of like pushing all the Voldemort stuff to the back of his mind because he's been having fun and, you know, being a normal kid. But he's like, you know, for the first time, my scar hurt. And then all of a sudden, like the dark marks being shown for the first time in however many years, like things are very much like happening. And it's hard to kind of like not think about it at this point.
And I think one of the things that really strikes me is sort of when they ask Arthur, I mean, Harry asks Arthur, like, why were they just like levitating and spinning around those muggles? And the way Arthur says it is that for a laugh, like that's just funny to them. They're having fun. And I think that's a way to look at it. And it's sad, but I think the reality of it is so much worse. And I don't know if Arthur even thought that deeply, but the fact of the matter is it's making the muggles afraid to show that they can do that and enjoy making them afraid, to make the people watching afraid because we're the Death Eaters. We're now in public surrounded by government officials, but we can hurt people like this. We could hurt you like this, even if you're a member of the magical community. Look how we're doing it now to these people. And the dehumanization of like treating them like objects, spinning them around, not letting them have any autonomy of themselves. It's the fear and the dehumanization, and it's so common in hate groups to try and do that, to try and like make other people not understand or be able to relate to or see the humanity in the group you want to turn them against. And that's what they're doing. They're already trying to make wizards see something bad happening to muggles and not care or think it's funny.
Yeah, so this is kind of very much like one of the, like, I think, first turning points of the fact that like things are gonna get darker from here.
Honestly, it's a really, really dark chapter. It says a lot about the wizarding world, and it sort of like expands the level of like Voldemort hates Harry and wants everything pertaining to Harry dead because Voldemort hates Harry. Okay, cool. It's such another level to see just a group of wizards hating people who are muggles. Like, you don't see Voldemort really enact with muggles that often. And when you do, it's quick and it's Voldemort, and you're like, well, Voldemort's the worst wizard ever. Of course, he's an asshole to that perfectly nice old man, you know? But just a random group of Death Eaters being that horrendous, it's so stark to see how radicalized they are.
But do you have any final remarks before we wrap up? I think we've all talked about how kind of just like dark and scary this chapter is.
And the chapter is dark and full of racists.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite a twist from last chapter, which was all fun and games, sporting events. It's a bit of a like literary whiplash. Like the tonal change was stark.
Yeah, definitely. I am excited to explore Hermione and her activism going forward.
I love that. I think it's such an important part of her character, and there are some really fun like subplots going on. Fred and George's elaborate blackmail schemes.
Yeah.
Hermione kind of kidnapping an adult professional.
Hermione just being unhinged per usual.
Hermione's unhinged, but in such a good way.
And then we kind of hit like the first kind of like big kind of like plot dark twist. I am excited for more of like the dark or just tone twists going forward.
Yeah, this is like the inciting event.
Yes.
Right? Because I feel like every book has one. Like to have this be that, it's so much bigger in scale. And it's pretty early on too in the book. I mean, not chapter wise, because this is a big book, but like
Yeah, we haven't even gotten to the school yet.
we're not even at Hogwarts, and we're like, there are terrible things happening. There are a lot of terrible people here who are going to do terrible things to perfectly fine, wonderful people. And I also think, swinging back to trauma, God, this sounds like my psychiatry sessions. Swinging back to the trauma from before, this is we hear a lot. We know Harry has trauma. He's been through a lot of traumatic things. The things that traumatized him that he didn't overcome, like the death of his parents, we only experience as memories of the past. Like he has trauma from this thing that happened. We weren't there when it happened, sort of. And then all the things that would traumatize him now, up to this point, he's overcome or beaten. Like being one-on-one against Voldemort is scary, but when you win, it's not a traumatic experience as much. But he's starting to experience things that he doesn't win or immediately overcome. Like it's the first time we are with him as he goes through a traumatizing event, is this book. And it starts to happen more frequently going forward, but it's like it hits you so differently. Like even just seeing that happening to muggles would traumatize me, and I think does traumatize them when they think about it.
Yeah.
And like it hits differently because that it's like, oh, this is trauma. He's going to hold this in him for the rest of forever. It's part of who he is now. And he didn't overcome it. He didn't win. It's like, it's this terrible thing that happened, and Harry Potter couldn't even stop it.
And we're going to see a lot of that in this book. Thanks for listening to this episode of Potter Revisited, and we'll be back next time to discuss Chapter 10 of Goblet of Fire, Mayhem at the Ministry. If you have any thoughts on today's episode, you can reach us at potterrevisitedpodcast@gmail.com or on social media at Potter Revisited, and we will see you next time.
Bye.